Okay, so I think we'll get started. So we're really happy to have John Young here today. John is the president for data analytics at the Epsilon company up in Waltham.
Wakefield. It used to be Burlington, now it's Wakefield.
Okay. Up in Wakefield, which is a little north of Boston. And so we thought in the context of how we're starting a data science program here at Brown, and we know that a lot of our students are interested in this, it would be good to have somebody who actually manages in the field, who can tell you what it's like to work in a company like that, what kind of skills they're looking for, and what kind of opportunities you have. John and I play soccer together in an old guy soccer league called the Over the Hill Soccer League, which is online, and we actually won the championship last year. So we were driving up to New Hampshire on a 35-degree day, I think, in November for the championship game. And so we started talking, and sort of thinking about this, and I said, well, John, would you like to come down to Brown and give a talk about what you do? And he said he would. And so I'm really happy to have you here, and I hope we can all learn an awful lot about sort of this big new world of big data and data science. So I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Chris. Big new world it is, too. Hello, everybody. Great to be here with a group of like-minded people. So I'm here to talk about data science, okay? And specifically, I'm going to talk to you about it through the lens of the group I run at Epsilon, which is the Analytic Consulting Group. So it's really, my talk's going to be more geared around data analytics applied to marketing. And as we were talking about at lunch, the great thing about statistics and data science is it's so broadly applicable to so many different fields. But that's what my company Epsilon does. So I'm going to be talking about analytic applications really in that context. But definitely, to Chris's point, getting into the kind of background, the skills, the tools, the type of people that I think are successful in this sort of business. So hopefully, by the end of the discussion, you guys will walk out of here with a better sense of at least what one of the careers in data science looks like. And from my standpoint, now granted I'm a little selfish, it's a great field to be in. All right, so here's what I got for you today. I'm going to stand over here. So this is how it lays out. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time telling you about Epsilon, what we do as a global marketing services company. Then I'll get into the data science at Epsilon. So that's the group I run. It's called the Analytic Consulting Group. I'll follow that up with a couple of use cases I put together. And since this is the School of Public Health, I chose from our vast library of case studies, and I picked a couple of healthcare case studies, thinking that there might be a little more interest in that field. And then really, these days, no talk on data science is complete without some mention of big data, right? I mean, I think everybody's probably heard a little bit lately about big data. There's a lot of buzz around big data. But really, big data is useless without data science to derive meaning from the data, right? So important to touch on that because that's what's really driving a lot of growth in the data science field. We'll go over that a little. And we'll definitely have time for Q&A, but let's keep this informal. If you have questions as we go, please feel free to jump in. Just stop me. All right, great. So let me give you Epsilon at a glance. So what is Epsilon? Epsilon is, simply put, it's a global marketing services company that's in business to help a variety, a big range of organizations become more effective one-to-one marketers. And the way we do that is by using marketing technology and data, essentially. That's really the essence of what Epsilon does. And I got to tell you, it's a great business to be in. I've been at the company for 21 years now. And what got me interested in going in to the field that I've been in for this long now is I saw what was happening out there. A lot of companies, particularly big companies who traditionally only advertise over the TV or radio or print and these different channels that are hard to measure and they're not one-to-one channels, they started to see what you could do with direct marketing. And they also, at least the ones that were really savvy and saw the future, they saw how you could use data science to make that one-to-one or addressable marketing more effective. And my background's in economics. I only have a master's in econ. I know many people here have much more high-powered backgrounds, but it's one of the good backgrounds to go into this field. And I saw what I thought was going to happen in terms of the application of quantitative techniques I learned in graduate school to this field, and it didn't disappoint me. And we'll talk a little bit about that when I get into what my group does. All right, so I'm just going to try to, in one slide, just again to give you guys a little better grounding on what Epsilon does, describe it so you have a sense of what we do before I then talk about my group. So really there's a few different pieces to the puzzle in terms of what Epsilon brings to its clients. And at least from my perspective, it all starts out with marketing data, okay? Right? To really market more effectively to its customers, the kind of companies we work with, they need access to lots of different kind of data because that's how they're going to develop what we call the 360-degree view of their customers and really understand what makes those customers tick so they can ultimately market to them more effectively. So this entails what we call both first-party data, which first-party data is data that companies actually capture on their customers. So the most obvious example of that is what you buy from any company that you do business with. That data gets tracked and maintained because what we found through all the analytic work we do is one of the best predictors of future behavior is past behavior, right? So that's your key first-party data. But then there's also a variety of what we call third-party data, and this is part of the business that Epsilon's in. We compile and sell data to our clients. So we'll combine that third-party data, which is a bunch of demographic, lifestyle, attitudinal type data. We'll combine it with that behavioral data, that first-party data, and we will build very large marketing databases that store this data and then have that data available for my team to do analysis and also use those marketing databases to deploy a variety of different marketing campaigns. So that's the first piece. So you got the data, but really data is kind of like a battery, right? It's useless unless you hook it up to something, and that's kind of where my team comes in. We do a variety of analysis, which I'll describe in some detail in a few minutes, that lead to insights about the client's customers that then in turn become a basis for more intelligent marketing. So in marketing, it's all about anticipating what your customers' needs are, right? So you can market to them more effectively and deliver more relevant communications. All right, so once you have that foundation in place, you've looked at the data, you've done the analysis, you've generated the insights, then you got to start to turn those insights into action, right? And so this is where Epsilon's agency services business comes into the picture. So what the agency services part of the company does is it helps develop and implement marketing programs and campaigns for its clients. And a big part of our agency services is a group that is called creative services. Okay, so these are, you've probably seen shows or ads or whatever, the classic sort of, goofy sort of agency guys that sit back in a room and boil up all these clever marketing campaigns. Well, that's, Epsilon has probably 300 or 400 people that do just that. They work with this data and the insights we produce to come up with hopefully more intelligent one-to-one marketing programs for their clients. And the whole idea is that they will develop intelligent creative and messaging, i.e. the marketing communications, that when delivered to their customers will better resonate with those customers. They'll find it very relevant, and it'll bring about the desired behaviors, which is namely, selling more of the products and services that the company sells. Okay, so that's a big part of the business. Okay, but then once you've done all that, you have to have a way to get the marketing out there, right? And so a big part of Epsilon's business is actually helping companies get these marketing programs that we've either developed for them or they've developed on their own to get those programs out there in a variety of different channels. So, think about direct mail. Epsilon does a ton of direct mail. Email has become a very big marketing medium over the years. Epsilon is in the email business. We have an email platform called Harmony. Last year we sent out in the neighborhood of 45 billion permission-based emails on our clients' behalf, promotional type emails. A year ago we bought a company called Conversant, which is one of the biggest ad tech companies out there. So they deliver targeted displays. So if you're ever out on the internet and you're on whatever site and you'll see an ad pop up, well, they're a company that does that kind of thing. They're trying to send ads out to you that would be relevant based on what you're doing on a given publisher site at a given point in time. And then more recently, we have developed relationships with Facebook and some of the other bigger social media platforms like Twitter, and we are able to deploy campaigns on our clients' behalf on those social media platforms. So that's this piece. It's a very big part of what we do. And then finally, there's integration and implementation. And Epsilon is considered an MSP, which is a marketing solutions provider. So the whole strategy with Epsilon and building out this kind of end-to-end portfolio of all these different marketing services I've provided is that we can be that one-stop shop for our clients. So they can come in and they can get all their marketing services needs met under one roof, so they don't have to go to this company over here or that company over there to get it done. They can get it all done from us. So we do all that, and part of that also is once we've implemented marketing campaigns for clients, you need to close a loop and measure how those marketing programs and campaigns have done. And that's actually another big practice area for my group. We do a lot of different measurement work, which I'll describe to you here in a minute. So that's kind of the 50,000-foot view on what Epsilon does. Any questions on that before I go on? Okay, so let me tell you about ACG, as we call ourselves, the Analytic Consulting Group. And really, if you boil it down, the essence of what we do is we try to develop high-impact solutions for our clients that drive better business outcomes. Because at the end of the day, what we're in business to do, both my group and the company, is drive better marketing outcomes for our clients, okay? So let me tell you a little bit about the team so you get a little bit more of a sense of who we are, the different people we have within the group. So we're one of the larger analytic shops in the business. So I have 145 people on my team. The one thing they all have in common is they have some kind of quantitative background, right? But there are really 3 different types of tracks or skill sets within my team. And these are folks that ultimately will work together to develop the solutions that we deliver to our clients. So, what I'm calling the technical experts here, you can think of these more as like the data programmers and the people who just live, eat, and breathe data. So these are folks who will pull data from various data sources, whether it be a marketing database that Epsilon is hosting for its client or that and some other data sources. They'll pull data from a bunch of different sources and put them together into an analysis-ready data set, okay? So they're doing a lot of SQL and a lot of SAS programming to get the data ready for the other people in the group. The statistical consultants, and this group, by the way, is probably maybe 20% of the overall team, okay? And then the statistical consultants, these tend to be master's and PhD level statisticians who are really doing all the heavy lifting, all the complex work we do in the areas of predictive modeling and segmentation. Very, very deep bunch. They've won a lot of awards, a lot of contests in the industry over the years. Really, really solid group of people. That's probably roughly a third of the group. And then the final piece here, and actually the biggest part of the group, and this is kind of the side of the group that I came up through over the years, is what I'm calling analytic consultants. So these are the folks who are spending a lot of time with clients on the front end to really sit down and understand, okay, what are your business and marketing challenges, and what are the right analytic solutions to create to help you with those challenges. And then, of course, they work with the folks in the other teams to actually develop those solutions, but then they also, on the back end, will sit down with the client and spend a lot of time trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we best deploy whatever it is, if it's a predictive model, a segmentation solution, whatever work we do. Very important to work with the client so that they properly implement the work so they get the full value out of it, right? That closed loop is very important. So that's the team. Again, a great group of people. Big part of the reason I've been at the company so long is because it's just a very smart, dedicated group of people that work well together and have a lot of fun in the process, which is important in any job, I'll tell you, because there's a lot of jobs out there where you can have not a whole lot of fun. So it's a great place to be. Okay, let me give you a little background on the tools we use. So I won't comment on the hardware. We work in 2 different environments where we deploy our tools. But from a software perspective, this isn't even all the tools, but these are the primary tools we use. So we are still primarily a SaaS shop. We've had a big relationship with SaaS for quite a while. As we were talking about at lunch, we spend a lot of money every year on SaaS, about $750,000, which we would like to shrink over time. But we are using not only the base SaaS package, but we use SaaS Stats quite a bit. We license several other modules. The team over the years, primarily the statistical consultants I mentioned, have built a pretty extensive library of SaaS macros, over 200 at this point. And as you can imagine, the whole goal of having those macros is to automate certain recurring tasks that we're doing, particularly things around the modeling process, so that we can get the work done more efficiently and give the analysts more time to really sit back and understand and tweak the solutions that they're developing. We recently licensed Enterprise Miner to complement our SaaS suite, and this has allowed us to get more utility out of certain types of work we do in SaaS, because it's more of a point-and-click environment that allows some of the people that aren't as good with SaaS coding to do more with the tool. So things like association and sequence analysis you can do very quickly in Enterprise Miner, develop shade trees, that kind of thing, and some nice, really user-friendly output to go with it. More and more, though, over the last few years, we've started to do things in R, which is, I think most people know, it's an open source software. So it's a set of software that's maintained and added to, expanded upon by its users, and they particularly have a lot of good machine learning capabilities within R, and some of the modelers within the team have been using it to augment what they can do in SaaS. So that's a very versatile tool, and actually we've leveraged R in the last couple of years to develop our own in-house text mining capabilities versus going out and spending a bunch of money to license the tool. So that's another application we have gotten out of R. And then, some of the other notables here are Python. We're starting to do more and more with Python as we start to work more and more with big data. Pagic, I believe is how it's pronounced, is actually a social network analysis tool. I believe also open source, and actually one of the case studies I have illustrates the use of that. Something we're doing more and more for clients is data visualization to really bring analysis and output to life and put it out there in terms that average people, laymen, can understand. If you have the ability to visualize it better, it's going to resonate much better. And so Tableau is a tool we're using quite a bit to do that, to create dashboards. We also use Excelsius quite a bit for that, create particularly some very nice C-level dashboards for like CMOs and CEOs that really resonate well with those people and put us in better standing with those clients. And then we do have, and this group actually recently came into my group, we have about 15 people that do nothing but digital analytics, and so they use Adobe Analytics, Google Analytics, and Domo to do most of their work. Digital analytics is getting very big. So that's the software. And then in terms of analysis techniques, I'm sure most of you folks taking statistics recognize all of these techniques, I would think. But what we do the most of, I would say, given the use cases of the applications we're executing for clients, a lot of it is predictive modeling, where we're trying to help them figure out who do they target for their different marketing campaigns. So we do a ton of logistic regression to help with that work. In some cases, clients want help trying to figure out, okay, which of my customers are going to be the most valuable. So we do a lot of what we call expected value models, and those entail taking logistic regression models and combining them with linear regression models to come up with a measure of expected spending that they can then use to guide their marketing investment. So linear regression in combination with logistic regression is quite big. We do a lot of segmentation work. For the segmentation work, we do typically factor analysis followed by cluster analysis to come up with a small number of distinct segments that the client can then market to. Survival analysis is a tool we're definitely using more and more, and it's time to event type analysis. The biggest application of that for us is helping clients with attrition. Every organization loses some number of customers every year, so if you can help them predict what customers are likely to leave, particularly high-value customers, so they can take preemptive action to save them, it's very valuable to them. So survival analysis is a very good tool for that. We also use survival analysis to develop what we call lifetime value models, which are measures of expected spending over the customer's lifetime. So those are the primary techniques that we use. A few others there, including we do a fair amount of media mix modeling, so we do some time series econometric type modeling to support that. Any questions on any of this? Such a quiet bunch, Chris.
They are.
Taking it all in, right? Okay, so those are the tools. So let me give you a little bit on what my group actually does. So how do we use all these different tools that I've talked about? So really, there's kind of three pieces of the puzzle for us. And this slide, and granted, some of it's probably going to be hard to make out in the back of the room, but this is really kind of meant to convey at a summary level what we do. And much of the work we do, we consider to be develop a foundation. So it's going in many cases, helping clients to go in and understand, okay, well, what is the makeup of my customer base? So if we go in there and create some segments within the customer base, and then do some analysis of those segments, they're ultimately going to be able to create marketing programs that are tailored to the characteristics of those different marketing segments, all right, versus kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to marketing. So that tends to be a big area of work for us, okay? The next part of the wheel, what I'm calling here enable connections, refers to the idea of, okay, well, it's great if you've segmented a customer base and you are in a position to develop differentiated marketing, but that's really not enough. You really need to be able to anticipate which of your customers are going to be ready to buy your different products and services at different points in time so that you can deliver timely and targeted communications to those customers across the whole customer life cycle. So, again, predictive modeling is a very huge use case in our business, and I'd say probably still close to half the work we do is in that area. And then the third and final piece, and as I like to say, last but not least, is measure and manage results, right? So one of the great things about one-to-one marketing, direct marketing, addressable marketing, whatever you want to call it, is the ability to measure for your clients what that marketing is actually doing in terms of driving incremental behavior within their customer base, right? So we take measurement very seriously. We try to bundle measurement into all the other work that we do because selfishly we want to be able to not only show our clients how effective have your marketing campaigns been and what kind of return on investment are you getting, but by using the different tools that my group creates, the predictive models, segmentation, etc., how is that lifting the results of the program? Because if they can see the kind of impact, in some cases it's a very substantial impact that our tools are having on their marketing, their business outcomes, then obviously they're going to want to come back and buy more of our services, right? So we have to constantly, particularly people like me, the more senior people in the group, we have to constantly be selling our services, and the best way to do that is be able to very definitively show a client, here's what deploying, say, this predictive model did for this particular campaign, so that they're, hopefully chomping at the bit to come back and do more. So that's kind of a high level depicted in a wheel what we do. I touched on the different tools we use, but then obviously there's the data piece which I described earlier, and it's a combination of what I call little data, which is kind of more traditional structured data, numeric data that historically has been kind of the centerpiece of the kind of data we work with. But more and more, and we'll talk about the big data in a few minutes, we're doing more and more with big data to help drive improvements in the solutions that we're building. So it's a combination of those two types of data. Okay, so let's drill down a little bit on the develop a foundation type work that I mentioned. So again, it's all about identifying distinct groups and then uncovering opportunities to deliver differentiated marketing strategies against those groups. So We do a whole range of segmentation. It's bulleted down here. So we do demographic, behavioral, attitudinal, and needs segmentation and value segmentation. So again, the whole idea here is to be able to identify within what is typically a very heterogeneous and large customer base, very distinct homogeneous subgroups within that the agency services people I mentioned can develop differentiated and tailored marketing programs against. So we'll go in, we'll develop these segments, and then we'll do very deep profiling with all the great data I mentioned we have to really try to expose, okay, what are the salient characteristics of each of these segments so we better understand what their needs are, what the different marketing opportunities are, and very importantly, what's the appropriate investment level for the customers in a given segment. Not all customers are created equal, right? You want to spend more money on some customers than others because they have greater value potential. So we try to help clients figure out all that. Another important offering we have in this area is what we call a MOA, a Marketing Opportunity Assessment. And these are particularly popular for clients where Epsilon is building a database. So in many cases, when we build a client a marketing database, it's the first time they brought together all this very disparate data on their customers, so they're finally in a position to kind of take this 360-degree view of their customers. So what we do in a marketing opportunity assessment is we do a bunch of very detailed but very diagnostic profiling to go in and really understand, okay, what are the strengths and the weaknesses within your customer base, and what are the different threats and opportunities we see in that base so that we can help them start to figure out, okay, what do I need to be doing from a marketing standpoint to improve the health of my customer base, right? So going in and understanding things like what kind of attrition rate does the customer have? Are they losing some of their better customers? If they're sourcing new customers from different lists and other areas, are some of those sources more productive than others, and should they focus more money on those sources, that kind of thing. More and more we're doing text analytics. I'll give an example of that later, but think of all the different places where text data is emanating on social media sites, call center logs, they'll transcribe a lot of that data, chat data from companies' websites. So the ability to go in and take that unstructured data and try to discern some meaning out of it from a marketing standpoint is becoming increasingly important. Another thing we do in this area is analytic audits or assessments. Many organizations are wanting to start their own in-house analytics shops. They don't want to outsource it anymore because they realize how important this kind of work is to running their business more effectively. So we'll go in and we'll help clients size things up and start to actually develop their own in-house capabilities. We've even helped some clients like go out and source people like people they can hire to start those groups up. And we'll help them also develop analytic data marts so they have an analysis-ready data set to do the different types of analysis that they need to do. Those are very important areas as well. Okay, and then again, enabling connections. So again, it's not enough to have segmented your customer base so that you understand what kind of messages you should be sending them and how much you should invest in the different customers. Again, you need to be able to anticipate who's going to be in the market for the different products and services you sell so you can deliver those timely messages in the right channel at the right time to try to affect the behavior changes that you're trying to realize. So we do a bunch of different predictive modeling. It spans the entire life cycle, starting with acquisition, cross-sell and upsell of products and services. We do a lot of win-back modeling, so clients that have lost customers or customers have become dormant, trying to predict which of those customers are going to be most likely to reactivate and start buying their services again. More and more clients that have gotten more sophisticated with this also want to build what's called a recommendation engine. So think about having a suite of predictive models that you can use to try to predict which of my customers are likely to buy a given product or service. More and more marketing has gone real time, right? So organizations need to be able to interact with their customers in real time, and when a customer, say, comes on their website, be able to decide very quickly, like within 30 or 40 milliseconds, what's the marketing message I want to serve up to that particular customer. And that's what these recommendation engines are all about, is looking at the different model scores and looking where the customer is in their life cycle, trying to determine, okay, what's the right message to serve up to, again, affect whatever behavior change that they think is most appropriate at that point in time. And then one other area we help some of our bigger clients out with is called marketing optimization. So this is typically in situations where a client, one example would be Bank of America is a very big client of ours. They have very large-scale marketing programs where they're spending tens of millions of dollars a year. They're marketing a lot of different products. They're using a lot of different channels, and they use a lot of different offers to market their products and services. So what marketing optimization does is it looks at all these factors and it tries to maximize some objective function. Let's say it's maximize revenue subject to a bunch of constraints, typically marketing spend constraints. And we actually license a tool from SAS called MO, Marketing Optimization, to help with that kind of work. Very big area, really high ROI in that work if you do it right. And then again, finally, the third area, a very important area, is helping the clients measure and manage results. One thing we try to emphasize on with all our clients is that before you launch any marketing program, you need to have a measurement plan in place so that you are in a position to really understand what's working with that campaign, what is not working, so that you can continuously improve that program and better allocate your marketing resources going forward. So this typically entails working with the client up front to establish the learning plans, across your entire marketing mix. What are the different things we want to learn as we implement this program? Setting up the KPIs that allow you to measure against those marketing objectives.
What's a KPI?
Key performance indicator. So then when you're executing either test or the marketing programs, on the back end, you develop these KPIs so you can see how the campaign is doing so that you can, again, then get that continuous learning and help them figure out how to tweak those campaigns. So we do a bunch of different things in this area. It's all listed here. So naturally we do, basic campaign analysis, but we also do, a lot of dashboard reporting, and that, can look at just a marketing campaign itself, or it can be a more holistic type of dashboard where we're tracking at an entire customer portfolio level. How is that customer portfolio performing over time? So really helping the clients with both of those levels of reporting. We do a fair amount of media mix modeling, and this is very interesting application of time series analysis to marketing. So what a media mix model does is it takes all their marketing spend data across all their online and offline channels, looks at that on a time series basis, either typically weekly or monthly data, combines it with their sales data, and then brings in other environmental type factors that would impact how much they sell, things like demographic, population characteristics, competitive pricing, that kind of thing. Puts all that data together and develops outputs that measure the effectiveness of the different marketing they're doing so that they in turn can adjust their marketing budgets and say increase their TV spend or say decrease their search marketing based on the relative effectiveness of the different spend that they're doing. That's a very big area that's used by a lot of different clients. Experimental design work is also a very big area for us. So this again gets back to helping clients learn more from their marketing tests. So we do anything from basic A/B testing where you're only varying one marketing factor at a time to very in-depth multi-factor tests where we're using fractional factorial design so that we can vary parameters within a number of marketing factors at the same time, but get the learning on the back end as to how those different levels of different marketing levers are performing, and do the testing much more quickly that way and at a lower cost so that the client can get into market more quickly with whatever the winning marketing strategy is. So these are examples of some of the different types of work we do in the measurement area. And again, this is very important stuff because, again, the great thing about one-to-one marketing is the ability to test the effectiveness, measure the effectiveness of what you're doing, and quantifying the return on investment very, very important stuff. Question?
So for the dashboard reporting, where you're kind of summarizing this stuff into easily digestible information for non-technical people, what kind of tools or facets of these visualizations do you think come up most often that they really find effective?
Well, so in terms of tools for that kind of work, we do most of it in Tableau because we just have found that to be a very versatile visualization tool, BI tool really in general. But if I followed your question right, the other part was, what are we looking at in those dashboards? So the KPIs are going to vary based on what the learning objectives are of the client. So if it's let's say it's a campaign level dashboard, so typically the things they want to look at is what are my response rates, what are my conversion rates, the people that buy, how much are they spending, what are the characteristics of people who buy versus people who don't buy, how do my sales break down, say, regionally across the country, that kind of thing would typically what would be looked at. Good question. Anybody else? Yeah.
Do you give any sort of training in the course that we do, so you expect people to come?
I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you.
Do you give any sort of training in this specialized software that you use?
Most of the people on my team that use Tableau learned it just by us licensing it and actually maybe going out and getting trained. Tableau offers the training, but they also have pretty good tutorials, manuals, online training, so forth. So it's a pretty easy tool to pick up. If you can program in SAS and some of these other tools, Tableau, even I could do Tableau. And I haven't programmed in probably 20 years. So pretty easy tool to pick up. That's why it's part of the reason it's been so successful, because they make it easy for a wide set of people to use it.
Kind of specific, but do you have any recommendations for data visualization tools for qualitative data and not just quantitative?
Oh, by qualitative data, do you mean like unstructured data?
Like quotes from people, right? Or like actual words, right?
Text.
Oh, okay. So text mining.
Yeah.
There's a tool that we used for a while before we developed our own in-house text mining in R called Clarabridge. And they're not really unique in this regard. There's other text mining packages you can license to do this, but they develop some nice word clouds. So let's say you're doing some topic analysis on some qualitative, some unstructured data, and so it will create some nice visuals around, okay, what are the most common words or themes we see in this data set, and it will, the size of the words in that word cloud will be indicative of how frequently that showed up, that kind of thing. That's a nice intuitive way to show that data, particularly if you have audiences that, are just not very facile with that kind of thing. They can get the results pretty easily. Question down here?
So just so I understand, you segment the population into groups.
Yep.
And then you produce a model that predicts how a marketing scheme will affect each of the groups.
Yeah.
And you implement it, and then you measure it. Do you then go back and check your model against the information that's coming in, and you do a feedback? So do you put that new information into the model?
Yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely. Again, when we're measuring results of campaigns and programs for clients, we're selfishly bundling in the measurement of the model. So we just go, we'll think of a simple lift chart. Let's say it's a logistic regression model that's designed to rank order a population based on propensity to buy whatever product or service they're marketing. So as part of the measurement we'll look at how the model performed in market, and hopefully it mirrors what we saw when we built the model and we validated the model on some in-sample data. But to your point, we will constantly track the model inputs. Let's say there's 10 variables in a particular model. We know what the distribution was on each of those 10 variables when we built the model. So when we go to rescore that model for the next campaign, we look very closely at that data to make sure there haven't been significant shifts. Because if there have been, then we start to get a little concerned the model's not going to validate as well. So that's part of what we will always do when we go to rescore a model for future deployment, and depending on how things are looking and how the model's validating, we'll either recalibrate the model or refit it to the new data, or we'll just start from scratch and rebuild the model.
But you don't do that in the middle of the campaign.
No, we don't typically need to. Yeah, and often actually we'll back test. If it's a really big campaign the client's going to deploy the model against, and there's a lot of money riding on it, before we'll deploy the model in that campaign, we'll actually back test it in what we call an out-of-time sample. So let's say we built the model with data from time t and t minus 1. We'll then validate that model at time t plus 1 before we then apply it to a campaign at time t plus 2, because they want to get that comfort level that this thing's really going to work in market.
You might have mentioned it, sorry if I missed it. Did you use any type of machine learning techniques?
Yeah, we're doing more and more of that, and I'm not, frankly, as caught up in the details of what the team is using, but they're doing a lot of that in R. So a lot of it is alternatives to like logistic and linear regression, so it's different statistical techniques to see if they can produce any lift versus those more traditional. Like Bayesian would be one example of a technique that they'll experiment with and go head-to-head against a traditional like logistic model. All right, great. Good questions. Thanks for asking. All right, so just a little bit more about our group. So, how you go about doing this stuff and deliver with clients is important. I think particularly if you're considering a career in this kind of field, it's important to get an understanding of, okay, well, how do you work with clients, right? So, 10 years ago or so, it was great to be in this business because, there wasn't as much competition because there wasn't as many outfits like us doing this work, but also very few of our clients had any in-house capability. So it was great for us because we were kind of an outsourced analytic department. We did end-to-end analytics for our clients, and we developed analytic roadmaps for them, which kind of laid out short and long term, here's what your analytics should be to support your marketing, and we kind of ran everything for them. But what's happened over time, as I mentioned earlier, is more and more organizations realize the strategic importance of data science and analytics applied to their business and what it can do for their results. They've chosen to build in-house groups. So, we're not going to stop clients from doing that. That's just, that's the way of the world these days. It's the trend. So, for more and more of our clients, we now have become an extension of their own in-house groups. And as I mentioned earlier, we've actually helped a number of clients either start from scratch an analytic group or improve the processes that they have in place. So we have some very nice relationships where we work side by side with their in-house analytic teams, and that can range from just providing excess capacity when they need more work to be done that the in-house team can't do, or it's focusing on some of the more complicated work that they maybe wouldn't be ready to do yet. Some of the more involved, say, segmentation or modeling work. So we operate in both capacities, and we work with our clients on either a project basis or on a retainer basis. We prefer a retainer basis because obviously that means we have a longer-term relationship with the client. We've gotten to know their data very well. We know their business problems. We can just work more effectively, and we could probably also offer them more attractive pricing if they sign up for a retainer versus just project by project. But realistically, we realize most clients are going to want to start on a project basis, right? Because they're going to want to kick the tires and see how good we are before they sign up for anything longer term. So we're equally comfortable with both. We operate both ways. So we kind of go with the flow in that regard. This is what we call internally the trophy slide, if you will. So these are just obviously the logos of some of the different bigger clients that we work with. So Epsilon's one of the biggest global marketing services companies out there. So as you can imagine, we work across a number of the big industries out there, and maybe of most interest to you folks, if you're in the School of Public Health, is the healthcare clients. You can see some big names there. A lot of pharmaceutical clients that we've worked with in some cases for over 10 years now. They've done more and more over the years with direct and database marketing than they used to 10 or 15 years ago. So it's a great business to be in because the people on my team, rather than working for a going to work, say, for a Novartis and being part of their in-house analytic team, where you're only going to get exposed to a range of the types of things I've talked about. If you're on this side of the table and you're on the consulting side or the vendor side, supplier side, whatever you want to call it, you have the opportunity to get exposed to clients in all these different industries and see what their unique business and marketing problems are, get exposed to different types of data that they're using, and just do a wider range of work. So it tends to be more interesting just because of the range of things you get to do. Some of these clients are more sophisticated than others in terms of what they're doing, but it's a great place to be. All right, so I've mentioned predictive modeling a few times. It's a very big part of what we do. I wanted to spend just a little bit of time walking you through the process we follow because it's a very well-defined and buttoned-up process on our end that we can execute very efficiently but produce very good results for clients. So it's really a 5-step process. So the upfront part is sitting down with the client and really planning the project. What specifically kind of model do we want to build based on the business or marketing problem that we want to solve? And that might seem like a trivial and obvious step, but you'd be amazed at the number of times where we get different stakeholders on the client side together in a room and talk about what model do we need to build, and they can't agree on what it needs to be. And so it's important to sit down and get that figured out up front so that you're actually building the right tool for the problem to be solved. And the other big thing that needs to happen here, obviously, is you got to pull all the data together to create the model, right? And that could, in some cases, be easier than others, depending on what their situation is with data. But the more data you have to work with, the better the model you're going to be able to build, right? So it ends up, in many cases, being 60-70% of the effort actually getting all the data together to build the model. So it's kind of a necessary evil. Typically, at this point, you're also dividing your overall modeling universe into a model build and a model validation universe. Then you go on to pre-modeling. So here, we're just going in, typically with hundreds, in some cases thousands of potential predictive variables versus your target variable, and understanding, okay, on a one-on-one or a bivariate basis, which of these variables might be predictive of whatever behavior it is we're trying to predict. So we're going in, we're running F-tests, chi-square tests, depending on the data, and then we're calling it down to what we call a candidate list of variables. Typically, among this massive data, 40 to 80 variables that have some promise from a predictive capacity standpoint. Those are the variables that we're going to start to then feed into a preliminary model, okay? So then we move into the modeling. So we actually start to build some algorithms at this point and start to measure the stability of the model, the kind of the lift the model is creating. There'll be a lot of iteration here, kicking variables out, letting some variables in, testing for things like multi-collinearity. And ultimately, what we try to get down to is a model that has hopefully no more than 20 variables. The fewer the variables, the better. I'm a big fan of parsimonious models because they're easier to explain to clients, and you have less danger of an overfitted model that might not perform as well in market. So we'll go through that process. We'll take the model, we'll apply it to that validation sample that we've created here. As I mentioned earlier, we might apply it in a back test to an out-of-time sample if the client wants to do that. Once they're comfortable with the model, then we go into the model implementation. So this is just scoring the model on whatever the broad marketing universe is and rank ordering typically that audience based on the model. And then sitting down with the client and figuring out, okay, well, how are we going to deploy the model? So if it's a targeting model, how deep into the population are we going to market based on the expected economics of the campaign? And then working with them to make sure the model is used appropriately, and then we got the right test design in place so we're going to get maximum learning once we deploy that campaign using the model. So that's kind of the end-to-end process. Question?
For the building and testing the model, you mentioned overfitting. So my question is really, does overfitting really become a problem with big data?
I could be a problem with any data, right? Because whether you're using little data or big data, if you've overfit the model, what we have tended to see is that it's not going to perform in market as well. So I don't think big data is more prone to that necessarily. Haven't really even looked at that, to be honest. So it just kind of raises the bar in terms of making sure you don't overfit when you now have all this big data to work with in addition to the little data. Question?
So what's the approximate length of such a cycle for your typical?
For the model building?
Yes, for the whole process.
It's going to vary based largely on the size and complexity of the data set and how much data cleaning needs to occur. That's the big variable step. Typically anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks to build the data set. But then once we get into pre-modeling, largely because we have all these SAS macros written where we automate different steps in the modeling process, we can have models ready to be scored against the marketing universe in typically about a week. Whereas, 5 years ago, it used to take it like 4 weeks. So we've gotten a lot faster. We've had to because it's gotten more competitive and there's a lot of low-cost providers out there. So we can do that and still build what I would consider to be Cadillac models that perform very well. Another question?
Yeah, is a single person responsible for all this process, or if there is one person?
Good question. It varies. We actually talked about this at lunch a little bit, right? Those more technical people I mentioned would typically be doing the data set creation here, and then they would hand off the data set to the statistical consultants that would do the modeling. So there's typically going to be 2 people involved in building it, but then there's going to be a manager type person that's overseeing the process and signing off on the model before it goes into marketing production. Somebody else have a question?
She just asked.
She asked it. The faster, the better, though. Right? One of the things I've evaluated the guy in my group that runs this part of the operation on over the years is what have you done in the last year to further automate and improve the modeling process so we can build more models without sacrificing the quality. And that's part of how his bonus is determined on the job. So that's like one of the things I have to do as the guy that runs the whole group, right, is make them better and faster. All right, so here's a quick example of a acquisition model that we developed for one of our life insurance clients. So in this particular case, they were sending out direct mail solicitations to generate hand raisers that they could then pass off to the life insurance sales agents to try to close the deal. So we took recent in-market data, in other words, recent direct mail campaigns they ran, which were run against compile lists, other types of lists that they bought out in the marketplace. And we went through the process I just described, and then we built a model. We shared it with the client. They were comfortable with it, and then they validated it, and they went into market. And this is how it performed when we actually implemented it, a couple months later. So what the red line is showing here is, the kind of results they would get if they didn't do any targeting, right? They didn't use a model. So this is just your cumulative gains chart, right? It's percent of responders as you go from the top decile all the way down to the bottom decile. So if you did random selection, the red line, if you randomly pick half your universe, you generate half the response, right? Well, obviously the model does much better than that, so your lift is right here. So they chose, based on the projected economics, to mark it down to the 3rd decile. And we did a small sample of mailing across all these so we could truly validate the full model. But what they were able to find from this or produce was that 72% of the buyers were found in the top 3 deciles. So you can market to 30% of the population and actually find close to 3/4 of your buyers. So obviously you can see what that would do with the efficiency of the direct mail. And direct mail is not cheap, right? It was like 50, 60 cents a piece, the direct mail they were sending out. And for this particular model, here's the variables that came into the model. One of the things we always look at with any model is, hey, do these variables make sense based on what we're modeling? So, here was life insurance. So the top variable in the model, it had about 21% of the predictive power was marital status. So married households were more likely to buy life insurance than non-married households, which makes sense because married households are going to tend to have kids, and that's when people tend to buy life insurance, right, when they started having kids. So that made a lot of sense. Number of adults in the household was also an important factor. Length of residence, how long they had lived at their house, was actually negatively correlated because people that have been at a place longer are probably more likely to already have life insurance. That made sense to the client. Household income, as that goes up, likelihood to buy goes up, so on and so forth. So these are all household or individual level characteristics that were the top predictors. These bolded variables down here are uppercase variables. These are geodemographic variables that we often use in our acquisition modeling. So these are, it's just demographic data that's aggregated to different geographic levels like block group or zip code as a way to try to get more power out of the data. So as we see in most acquisition models, you know, these variables, if they come into the model at all, they tend to be what we call the bottom feeders, or the less important variables that explain, you know, a very small fraction of the behavior that we're trying to predict. So this is a pretty typical outcome here. All right, let me walk you through. I see I'm going a little slower, Chris, than I thought I might be.
Okay, don't leave if they don't, you know, they don't want to stay.
Okay. But this is hopefully, maybe some people would say, the most important stuff. So let's, you know, I gave you one example, some work, but here's a little bit more of an involved case study, and this was done for one of our healthcare clients. Okay, so in the healthcare business, more and more this is a pharmaceutical company. You know, traditionally they only marketed to HCPs, so the healthcare professionals, because those are the people they had to influence to get consumers to buy their drugs. But over time, they started to do more direct-to-consumer marketing as they captured more individual level data. So in this particular example, this was one of our larger pharmaceutical clients, and they had the flagship drug in the acid reflux category. I think it's called GERD is the actual therapeutic category. So this is like indigestion, right? So they had this drug. It was, but the problem was the patent was expiring, right? So the LOE is, I forget what that stands for, but it's indicative of when your patent is running out, and that's the point in time that generic drugs come on the market, and so all of a sudden their competition explodes, right? So they had to rethink the marketing that they were doing as they approached their drug going off a patent. So they had this savings card or copay card that they could use to incent trial and drive retention of or adherence of people on their drug. But the thing about these copay programs is they're expensive, right? It takes money to run these, and you're also giving the customers that use these copay cards a pretty substantial, in some cases, discount on the product. In their particular case, customers could get up to 30% off if they use the copay card. So they had to be very careful about who they would offer this copay card to, right? So what we did for them is we built what we call an uplift model. And so what this uplift model does is there's actually two models. One model goes in and looks at who is likely to buy this drug if they're offered the copay card. And the other model looks at who is likely to buy this drug if you don't give them the copay card. And then what we do in an uplift model is we compare those two propensities, and we use that to develop the three groups that you see here. So the red group, these are the people who wouldn't buy the drug regardless of whether you offer them this copay card, right? The other group is what we're calling the bypass group here. These are people who would buy the drug regardless of whether you offer them this copay card, right? And then the green group, and this is the core target, these are the people who we learned through the uplift model are going to be most positively affected by receiving that copay card. In other words, they probably wouldn't have bought your drug unless you offered them the copay card. So obviously, as you can imagine, these are the people they want to focus on. You particularly don't want to market to these people because why give somebody a discount for something they're probably going to buy already? Those are absolutely the kind of people that they want to avoid because they're just leaving money on the table. So we went ahead and built this model. You know, we validated it on a holdout sample as we normally would. We got the client comfortable with it. And then they implemented a test. And what they did is they took their marketable universe, they carved out a portion of those people, and they used the model to determine who they would offer the copay card to, okay? And then what they did for the rest of the universe was what we call BAU, or business as usual. In other words, they just did what they would have done before without the model. In their case, it was offering this copay card to everybody, okay? So red, green, or yellow, okay? So we went ahead and implemented that test, and on the back end, what we were able to show them was that the economic outcome was much better if you used the uplift model to figure out who you were going to market to. And when we applied that to the whole marketing universe and annualized it, it ended up generating over $4 million in incremental revenue and cost savings for them versus the business as usual strategy. So this was like a $75,000 project for them, and it produced over $4 million in incremental revenue. So obviously you can do the math on that. The ROI is pretty high. They're still a client of ours. We did this a couple of years ago.
And this was per year?
This was the first year that they applied the model.
So they could expect you $4 million every year.
Well, not necessarily, right? Because marketplace dynamics change. You had more people come into the market, and I don't think they did as well in subsequent years, but it continued to produce for them. So I think this is a great example of using predictive modeling to figure out how you better allocate your marketing investment and driving some very significant business value. Any questions? All right, one more case. So this one's on the HCP side, the healthcare professional side, specifically physicians. So traditionally what these pharmaceutical companies did is they marketed to healthcare professionals because these are the guys that have to write the prescriptions, right, to then get the consumers to buy the drug. So this is who they used to focus on with their marketing efforts. So some of the work we had done for these types of companies over the years is we would build predictive models that would look at a universe of physicians and help them figure out who is most likely to prescribe their drugs, right? And then what they would do is they use those model results to determine who with, of their field sales force, these are the guys that actually go in and face-to-face meet with physicians to try to sell them the drugs, who should they talk to versus use less expensive channels like direct mail or email versus physicians that they shouldn't talk to at all, right? So this is an area of work that's been around for a long time. Plenty of our competitors do it. All the pharmaceutical companies used it. But a couple of years ago, we started talking to one of our larger clients about trying to do something above and beyond this, and specifically trying to leverage social network analysis to better figure out what to do in these campaigns. And the idea was if we could find physicians who not only prescribe their drugs, but we thought would be advocates for their drug and could influence the behavior of other physicians who might not otherwise prescribe their drugs, that it could produce some significant incremental revenue in these programs. So the way we did this is we access what's called the PubMed database. Probably, Chris, you're familiar with that. So I don't know a lot about it, but it has like millions of publications in it, right? So this particular, the pilot project we did involved the cardiovascular category, right? So the way we went about this is we went in, we identified a potential marketable universe for this new cardio drug that this company had developed. We then went into the PubMed database and we looked for publications that had keywords related to cardio or cardiovascular, so we could understand among all these physicians, who is publishing papers in this area. So we went ahead and did that. We looked at the overlap between the doctors who had published related articles and were in the marketable universe for this drug. And then what we did next was the social network analysis, where we actually went in and we looked at all these attributes of their social network. And the way we determined the social network was we looked at co-publications within that database. So, many of the publications, as you can imagine, it's not just one author; it's people co-publishing. So we use that as a means to determine what these physicians' social network was, within the context of their business. Okay, so we use this, one of the tools I alluded to earlier is called PAGIC, I believe is how it's pronounced. It's a social network tool. We use this to develop social network attributes using that data. And then we did some cluster analysis with those social network attributes to identify the three groups you see here. So there's the key influencers, there's the connected doctors, and the isolated doctors. So the three clusters coming out of this cluster analysis were these folks. So we then focused on the key influencers and the connected doctors, and we looked at, okay, within this universe, how many of these people have actually prescribed this new drug? Because we knew these people had the potential to be advocates for this drug. They were prescribing it, right? But we also knew they had extensive social networks because they came out as key influencers or connected doctors based on that social network analysis. So we took that then and devised this new campaign, and what we did is, their marketing people came up with different outreach programs they could use against these key influencers and connected doctors. And what we did is we took this universe, it was about 1,400 healthcare professionals, and we randomly divided it into half. They used this new marketing program against half that population, and then the other half they just did business as usual marketing. And then 3 or 4 months later they went out, and with the prescription, access to the prescription data they have through a vendor they use, they looked at the actual prescribing behavior of those groups of physicians, and they compared the two groups, and they did all this analysis in-house, and what they found was that the ROI on that new marketing program was more than 4 times as great as the business as usual marketing, and a big part of the reason for that was these doctors who subsequently advocated their drugs ended up influencing the behavior of all these other physicians who subsequently prescribed that drug. They could see it in the data when they did the back-end analysis. So I think this is a great example of how you can use unstructured data and some social network analysis, i.e. some big data, to get a little more creative in terms of how you're doing the marketing and drive even better marketing outcomes.
What kind of time frame was this over?
This campaign? I think they ran the pilot for, if I remember correctly, it was like 4 or 5 months. And
it's a pretty fast propagation rate of information.
Yeah, and I think they debated on how long they should run it, and they left the option open to run it longer, but they went in at that point and did the back-end analysis on the RX data against these two populations, and saw enough lift that like, hey, we're going to roll with this, and then they continued to use it. We've refreshed this analysis for them. We've done it in other therapeutic categories since then. So again, I think this is an excellent example of using big data, unstructured data, to get a little creative and do some work above and beyond the more traditional work we would do to help drive better business outcomes.
Well, this social network analysis really is kind of your first step of segmentation, right? It's just a different way to do the segmentation.
It was, yeah. We had never done segmentation like this before with social network data, so it was kind of path-breaking for us. It was the team was pretty excited to be able to do it, and particularly to see the results on the back end that they got. It was pretty cool. All right, great. So again, wanted to just show you some live examples so you get a better sense of here's the kind of actual work these data scientists, these analytic practitioners with my team are doing, and more importantly, what it's doing for the clients. Pretty compelling stuff, I think. All right, I'm gonna skip a few slides here. Oh, this thing's all of a sudden not working. There we go. I'm going to skip over this big data part because I think we've covered a fair amount of it. So actually, I will spend a couple minutes on this. So as it relates to marketing big data, these are some of the primary sources of big data. So as everybody knows, there's a lot going on the internet these days. This is where a lot of the big data is being generated. So looking at web logs can tell clients a lot about, by seeing where your customers are going on the internet, you can learn a lot more about them than you would have otherwise. Obviously, social network data, if you can get it, also tells you more about your customers. CDR, call detail records, this is really more applicable to telco companies. They have since they know all the calls that somebody's making and all the text messages they're making, as well as receiving, they can construct that person's social network, or at least in part through that kind of data. So that opens up the opportunity to do some of the kind of analysis I just described. Obviously, e-commerce is very big. It generates a lot of data. Purchase transactions, I mean, that you might not necessarily even consider that big data because it's been around for a while, but it's part and parcel of what needs to be looked at. And then, of course, the kind of compiled data that I mentioned earlier. But just real quickly, some of the use cases of big data in marketing are listed here. And one in particular that I'll comment on is customer churn or attrition analysis. This is a big area of work for us, is trying to help clients figure out, okay, which of my customers might I lose so I can market to them and try to retain them. So traditionally, when we did this kind of analysis, we would use little data or structured data. And that worked pretty well because what a customer has done behaviorally with the client in the past is a pretty good predictor of their likelihood to stop buying from that client. But what we started talking to this particular client about was, hey, let's start to mine some of this big data, namely some unstructured data, to see if we can pick up more signals in that data that would allow us to incrementally improve the prediction of attrition. So what we did in this particular case, this is a banking client, we isolated customers of theirs that had done web chats on their website. Everybody's probably done some kind of web chat, right? They captured all this data and they stored it in a data warehouse. So we used our in-house R text mining tool to do what we call theme or topic analysis, as well as sentiment analysis on that data. So in other words, what are these people chatting with the reps about? What products and services, what other topics? And then importantly, what is the sentiment of that chat? Is it positive? Is it neutral? Is it negative? Because obviously the idea was that particularly on the sentiment side, people that have a negative sentiment in these chats they're having are going to be more likely to attrite than other customers, right? So we went in, we put all this data together, we did the text mining, we coupled it with the actual attrition data to just start to look at some simple correlations. To what extent do the topics or themes that people are chatting about, as well as the sentiment of those topics, around those topics, do we see any predictive promise in that data? And yeah, we did, but then the real test was, okay, well, once we couple this with all the other structured data that we would typically use to build these models, does it help us incrementally improve the prediction of attrition, and would it be cost effective to use that data in those attrition models? And in fact, what we found was that it did, and they now have a model in production, kind of the next generation attrition model, that layers in the specific text mining data we found that was helping to predict those kinds of business outcomes. So again, another example of using big data to improve the analytics and improve the business outcomes. So just a couple of notes here to point out the fact that if you're considering a career in this field, you probably couldn't pick a better time to do it, because there is already a huge shortage of analytic professionals, what I'm calling here data scientists. So this is one statistic we pulled. Indeed.com tracks job postings on different job boards. And from 2012 to 2016, they saw a 1,600% increase in the posting for data scientists. So that gives you one indication of the increase in demand for these types of people. This is a little dated at this point, but still, I think, pretty accurate. McKinsey, tracks what's going on here. And they say that this is as of a couple of years ago, there was close to a shortage of 200,000 professionals that could do advanced analytics. and a even much bigger shortage of managers to oversee that kind of work and provide kind of the business layer, 1.5 million. That's a big part of the reason universities like Brown are starting these programs, right? Because academia is kind of belatedly realizing, whoa, there's a huge need here. We need to add data science, applied analytics, whatever you want to call them, programs, because more and more people are going to want to study this stuff because they see the job opportunities. We've seen, a lot more colleges launch these programs in just the last 5 years. We have active partnerships with Bentley, Bryant, a couple other schools. And then the last slide here, because I think it's important to look at kind of the full picture on, at least from my perspective, what are the skills that make somebody successful in this business. And they do kind of fall into two categories here. So, what I'm calling the hard skills here on the left, I don't think there's any real surprises here. These are really kind of the pure quant skills, right? So there's a few things here. So obviously the math and stats background and capability is important if you want to go into this field. What's also important is that you have a good analytic thought process, that you can go into a given situation, like say you're working at a specific corporation, that you understand their products and processes, and you can see how data science could be applied to help them improve their business outcomes. That's a skill that's acquired over time. You don't necessarily learn it in school, but more and more of these schools that are launching these programs are trying to do it in an applied way, so people come out thinking the proper way about business problems. And then we've touched on this before, the ability to really navigate around very large data sets, a lot of it increasingly being unstructured data, and get to the point where you can quickly get meaning out of that data, the big data. Those kinds of programming skills, the traditionally found in computer science programs are becoming increasingly important. So those are the hard skills, but what is often overlooked and becoming increasingly evident you need to be successful in this business is what I'm calling here the soft skills. So there's a few different things going on here. The communication skills, really communication skills are important in any field you're going to go into, but I think they're particularly important here. So I'm referring to not just verbal communication skills, but written communication skills. Often in this business, you're doing very complex analysis that the average person is not going to be able to understand. You need to be able to distill that down and communicate in a way that people can get it, and hopefully they can get excited about it and see how they can apply it to their business. So these communication skills and the ability to take those communication skills to a higher level and really have that kind of storytelling capability is critical. Because again, if people don't understand the work, they don't get it. I don't care how good the work is, it's just going to sit on a credenza somewhere. I can't tell you the number of times we've done great work and clients like, okay, great, thanks a lot, see you later. They don't deploy it for whatever reason. It's too bad, but it does happen. And then, collaboration, teamwork are all very important. It's important to have some creativity in this. You got to be able to think of the right questions to ask of the data before you go in to analyze it. Curiosity, all these things are very, I think, important to kind of rounding out the skill set for what you need in this kind of field. So that's it. That's what I have. Again, hopefully this gives you a sense of, at least applied to marketing, what data science is all about, and gives you a glimpse of what a career in this business might look like. So open to any more questions people might have.
So let's open the floor up to questions.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about how we can leverage big data to improve population health.
I couldn't really. Could you?
How can you leverage big data to improve population health?
So,
People's health
like
in general.
Define public health. I think your context might be a little different than what I was describing, where we're working for like pharmaceutical and insurance companies. What's your take on that question?
Do you mean in the context of
Right, sorry,
sort of helping people or?
Right, so prevention of disease, right? So when you had that slide up about the people or the companies that you work for, have you worked with governmental agencies at all and thought about?
No, we don't. We don't work with any of the government entities because they typically wouldn't come to us for. We're a marketing services company, so they wouldn't even.
Right.
Although I think we could help them in the way you're describing, we wouldn't even be on their radar because of what our core business is.
But I guess for example, like if a state wanted to have a marketing campaign to reduce smoking or something, you could probably help them out quite a bit. But
Well,
nobody would ever think of coming to you, is what you're saying.
Yeah, in that kind of use case, probably not.
So what you need to do is get a job in one of those places.
So you can go out and sell what we do to government bodies like that.
There's a variety of examples out there. For instance, the CDC tracks spread of disease, and there's this famous Google case where Google looked at searches for the conditions of the virus and was able to actually track the spread of the disease faster than the CDC. But of course that has inherent problems as people know about that, and as information spreads, creates a feedback loop which generates noise within the system and can cause problems.
Talking about Google, we know that Google also have its kind of analytic groups on business data as well, and marketing data as well. So what's your view in terms of advantages and disadvantages Google's as a competition of your company?
Are you talking about Google Analytics tool?
Yeah, they have like groups analyzing their marketing data to help place the advertisement on website or videos.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not very versed in the Google Analytics tool because that particular team, like literally just a week ago, moved into my group. So I haven't been exposed to what, say, Google Analytics can do versus Adobe Analytics. I know at a high level what those tools do, in terms of like keyword analysis and that kind of thing, but I don't know much about the Google Analytics tool beyond that. But you can Google it and learn more.
Actually, John, I had a couple questions. One is, well, let me ask the technical question first. So, what do you do about biases caused by missing data? So, for example, you're going out there and getting this information, but there's a lot of people who aren't responding because they're either. We were just talking about something this morning. You're trying to get some feedback on a course you've given. And you have, or something like Yelp, for example. The people who respond are either going to be people who are really happy or really unhappy.
Yeah.
So how do you get around that problem?
Well, this might not completely answer your question, but an example of where that is a problem, the kind of work we do. So one type of model we build for clients is a value model where it looks at expected value or expected spending of a customer, say, over the next year. And so that expected spending is a function of what is the likelihood of that customer to buy my products and services over the next year, coupled with how much will they spend if they buy the product. So the way we produce that score is we just build those two models and put them together and come up with that expected spending. So the big bias there is for that second stage model, the linear model, it's only based on the people that actually bought, right, in that year before or whatever sample you're using time frame wise to build the model. So you don't have any information on what the people who hadn't bought before might spend going forward. So that's I think a bias per your example. So I didn't go over the example. It was one of the tools I mentioned. You might remember, and you have a copy of the deck so you can see it. But what we have there to correct for that bias is what we call the Heckman two-stage, which you as a statistician probably know better than I because it's the guys in my stats group that are running that. But as I understand it, the way it works is it'll take that first stage model, what is the likelihood somebody's going to buy? There's no bias there because it's based on the entire universe, right? So one of the outputs of that first stage model, that logistic model, is a term they call the lambda term, which then gets used in the second stage model where it's only a subset of that overall population, the people that spent that you have as a basis for building that model. If that lambda term is significant, that's indicating that you do have bias in that subset that bought, and it corrects for that bias. Statistically, how it does that, I'm not quite sure.
Assumptions, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's one example of how you deal with that. Beyond that, the more general way, obviously, is just based on population characteristics, using stratified sampling, whatever you can to try to correct for biases as best you can.
The other question I had was just in terms of if students want to get involved in this kind of work, either in the marketing area or otherwise, so there are students that are taking courses, but what would you advise them to do? In other words, to get the experience to be able to do this.
I would, seek out internships at whatever types of companies, you're potentially interested in working for. And that a good way to get started on that is actually go to their website, because they'll typically have information about internships there. And obviously, networking is critical. As they say, it's not what you know, it's who you know, because these internships are often hard to get. They're pretty competitive. But you can even get a little more creative and aggressive than that, and contact, say, the HR department and maybe show examples of some work you've done, say at the undergraduate level, that demonstrates some kind of expertise in the kind of area of work you want to go into. Some HR people will share that with hiring managers, and that might be enough to separate you from the pack and get you that interview. I've seen that happen in our department. People that just get a little more creative and find a way to stand out from the rest of the crowd that we might be considering.
Question. So when clients come to you, which situation is more common? Is it like they bring their own marketing data, or like they simply say, I want to increase my profits, or I want to increase my revenue? Which one is more common right now in your company?
Well, it's all of them want the second part. They're coming to us to help them improve the outcomes of their marketing programs. But I'd say probably roughly half of our clients are clients who we build a marketing database for. So we will take all that first-party data that they have and organize it at a customer, individual level, household level in a database and make it accessible for analysis and marketing.
Okay, but what's your advantages compared to them? Because they could hire some people to do like for linear model, logistic models, and then what's your advantages in your company?
Well, they could, but if they don't have that capability already created in-house, then they have to go through all the steps to launch that capability, whereas that's what we're in the business to do. So, and particularly if we have their marketing database, we can build the model very quickly, give them the result, and then they're ready to implement it through that marketing database and deploy, their program.
So your statistic consultant is kind of more like a strategy consulting sometimes?
Sometimes. We have different people that play that role really as their job, but there's definitely some interplay between the statistician who built the model and the strategist that's helping the client develop the marketing program. That strategist has to understand the model to help the client effectively implement the model. So there's some collaboration between those two groups to make it all work for the client. Yeah.
So,
but what we've seen is some people they'll start off as statisticians and they'll do that for a while and they're like, okay, this is great, but I'm ready to move on to something else, and they'll move into that strategy kind of role. So it could be like a career progression if that's what interests you.
So the bonus is created with the increase of the revenue and profit in the client company.
Yeah, I mean, the clients need it all. So, some people, again, want to start off doing the pure data science work, but then evolve into more of a consulting role and working with the client.
So how hard is it to get access to all the data sources? So, for instance, you said, you need to get the company's marketing database or whatever, their sales information. but then you also tied into social network information. If I don't know, you said the scripts for the physicians, you had to tie into some form of database that told you who was writing the
yeah, there's companies that do that specifically. They amass all that data.
But how do you even know where to go to look that this information exists? I mean, Google, yeah, there's Google out there, but how do you know that there's this company that exists that has this information on all the scripts that every doctor has ever
well, so in that particular example, since healthcare is a pretty big practice area for us, we know that ecosystem of service providers, including the RX data aggregators. So like there's like IMS, Symphony. There's a couple other companies that do this. They take all that prescription data from the PBMs and they create these databases, that show all the prescriptions that all the different physicians have written. And that database also has the individual level data that all the drugs are being prescribed to. So they will have it. The tricky part with all that is obviously HIPAA and all the security and compliance around making sure consumers' privacy is respected, and that this data, if you ever get access to it, there's no PII, no personally identifiable information. It's all de-identified. And typically when we get that data from these RX providers, we have to work with it in more of an aggregate level. So it's a little tougher in the healthcare field because that kind of first-party data, there's those restrictions around it. Whereas like with our financial services clients, telco clients, insurance clients, we have all that retail clients, their e-commerce we know exactly what you bought, on what day, how much you spent. It's all a big part of the marketing database. So it varies from industry to industry, really.
I suppose we could get into another conversation about should that data actually be available in the big data, but
it's a whole different discussion. And there's people at my company whose jobs are, they're tied like with the legal group, is to make sure that, we're being very careful about how we use clients' first-party data, and that, no personally identifiable information leaks out into the marketplace and people's privacy is respected. Because, you've heard stories over the years about companies that have been hacked and data breaches and all that. That actually happened to Epsilon about 7 or 8 years ago. Somebody hacked into one of our email systems and exposed like social security numbers, credit card numbers from one of our clients' databases. It was a big problem. So yeah, that's kind of the dark side of big data. You're right. Is particularly on the internet where you're out surfing around, the expectation is that you're doing all this anonymously, but the reality is many companies use cookies so they can, that's how they know when you come back what message to show you, right? So it's legitimate there, but when they use it to know what you've done elsewhere on the internet, that can get a little creepy. So.
All right, well, thanks. Thanks, John.
Okay.